Ram Dass died this past week. And I didn't really know him. I have a kind of footnote connection to many people on the planet, which I've always found very interesting. You know, famous people that I'd like to step away from, or I'm a footnote in their lives, or they are in my life, and I guess he's one of them. I know that early on, he wrote a book called Be Here Now, and I thought it was the stupidest title I ever heard. And it was pablum, and it meant nothing, and I was kind of negative about the idea. I thought it was really trying to simplify the spiritual journey. You know, be here now. I particularly didn't want to be here now. I didn't like the now, and I didn't want to have to be in it. But on the other hand, there was something very important about him at the early stages of my life. One of the most important was he was very close to Timothy Leary. And somehow or another, my roommate and friend from Detroit, Barry Kaplan, knew Timothy Leary, and he knew Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass, Baba Ram Dass. And I don't know what their relationship was exactly, but I do know that they went together somewhere in an airplane and it crashed. And Ram Dass and Barry survived the crash. And it kind of bonded them on some level. These are like the stories that Barry would tell me, and they didn't get a lot of detail, but it was like, okay, I'm glad you're here. The fact that Barry was the person who brought me to the world of LSD would not have happened if he hadn't survived that plane crash. And I think if he hadn't been part of the Richard Alpert, Ram Dass, Timothy Leary world, and whatever all that syndrome was, it really did change my life. I went from a very straight and narrow kid from Detroit into somebody who knew everything and nothing very quickly. I knew that the world I had imagined it to be was nothing like what I had imagined it to be, and that somehow there was another explanation for it all, and I started looking for that explanation, as did many people in the 60s when Western social mores and ideas and cultural values suddenly became meaningless. And part of what I did is I read Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, ended up, as you all know, hitchhiking around the world looking for teachers, particularly in the East, and not finding them. But a lot of people came back from a similar journey, having found teachers, and somehow they got back before I did. When I came back, a lot of things were already in play, and Baba Ram Dass had come back from India and met
Neem Karoli Baba.
Neem Karoli Baba, thank you. I came back and met Rudy, and there were lots of different sort of beginnings of the infiltration of Eastern thought into Western culture through various people. When Rudy brought Muktananda to America, and he created Big Indian, which is a retreat center for the visit of Muktananda, it was a very holy, special experience for all of us. I mean, the building of it was part of our muscle, that we actually did build this place. And we really did house this teacher from India, who was Rudy's teacher, and to our knowledge, a highly enlightened and very phenomenally important being. And in those days, I really believe people knew things and had a lot to offer. And among the people who came to Big Indian was Baba Ram Dass. And this is where the footnote is. He was there, and I was there. And we were all going to take a trip to a reservoir up here. God knows why we were going there. And Rudy and Muktananda were going to go in the same car to the reservoir. But Muktananda invited Ram Dass into the car instead of Rudy. And I was like enraged. Why is this guy usurping my teacher's opportunity to be with his teacher? It felt so wrong. And I developed a strange antipathy toward Ram Dass for having gotten in the way of something that was meant to be for Rudy. And I held on to that for a long time. Every so often people would tell me about his book, Be Here Now, and I would laugh it off. I would go, it's not about being here now. It's not that simple. It's work. Rudy taught work. There is effort here. There's things to be done. And I was committed to the idea of work. Years pass, Rudy passes away. I'm with all different kinds of teachers in this particular lineage. I discover another book about now called The Power of Now by,
Eckhart Tolle.
thank you so much, Tony. You're a savior today. And the mind fading of Bruce Joel Rubin. And that book really hit me. It really spoke right to my psyche. And I went, this is really interesting. And I went to see a weekend with him, spend a weekend with him at Omega Institute. And I found this man to be amazing. Not only a man who talked about being here now, he really was living in the now in a way that I felt immediately. And I was very, very intrigued by this idea that now may actually have some validation beyond just being a word and a simple idea that somehow anybody could just at any moment just be here now. He was there now. And he talked about it in a way that started to alter my entire spiritual path. At one point I did a retreat, and during that retreat I sat for 10 days in absolute stillness, a Vipassana retreat, and I failed totally. I hated sitting still for 10 days. I found every part of it to be annoying, and I tried to leave at one point. And they said, you know, you're kind of like in the middle of an operation and there's sutures hanging out all over the place. You probably shouldn't get up and walk away. You should stick this out. They said, if you want to sit in a chair, you want to do whatever to make yourself comfortable, do that. So I did that. I stayed and worked it out. On the last day, we were able to talk for the first time in 9 days. And I met one guy there who seemed like really intriguing. And he told me that he used to come to these gatherings just because he needed to have a place to sit quietly. He didn't believe in any of the Vipassana teaching, didn't care about any of it, but he was very caught up in a guy named Nisargadatta Maharaj, who wrote this remarkable book called I Am That. And he suggested that I read it. Somehow, I Am That, the power of now, all of that Be Here Now teaching opened a door. And it shifted things for me dramatically. I became very aware that working to get there was maybe really not the goal. That maybe the there wasn't there. That the there was where we've always been. And that was a big turning point for me. And I had spent, by that point, maybe 30-some years trying to get there. And I was trying so hard and thinking I was making some progress, but there really came a point where I felt all of this spiritual practice that I was doing, all of this asking, all of this sitting, all of this meditative struggle wasn't doing it. And so I stopped. For the first time in, I think at that point it was 44 years, I stopped practicing. 2 weeks later, I've told this story multiple times, but 2 weeks later I had this awakening. And the awakening was that there was nobody to awaken. The awakening was there was no Bruce to do a practice. The awakening was there is only now. And all these years of avoiding that idea took that long for the whole internal structure of my psyche to open up to something that was so simple and obvious and in front of me over and over and over, constantly presented. Now, be here now. And I took this inside and I felt this eternal nowness, this eternal presence of being. And it was a remarkable, transformative moment. I somehow thought it was the completion of and the end of the journey. And then I discovered, moving forward, that there was a now, and there was still a Bruce in it. The Bruce was somewhat smaller than perhaps before, but there was now and it, or me and it. And I realized that the awakening to the now was a first step, that the journey was bigger than I could have imagined, and that the part of me that was in the now still needed to work. There was still something to be done, and that something to be done had to do with I guess we call it purifying, washing away, a cleansing, a making it less separate from all that is. And that has become the journey, really, of my particular life. During that time, I watched videos of Ram Dass talking and suddenly found that I love this guy. Everything he was saying was right. Everything was simple. He had no pretense. He did not walk around being the great guru. He was just a guy living now. And he had a lot of difficulties in living now in terms of what happened. He had a terrible stroke. In a loving way, said he had been stroked, but he was very limited in his ability to speak, which was one of his gifts. In his ability to get around, he really was limited. And yet, you could tell from his talks that nothing about who he was had changed or was angry at or had been limited by the physical deformation of his body. He was expansive so greatly and beyond that limitation. And I would hear him give talks to other people, often people who were in need, who had lost people. His level of compassion, his level of empathy for others was so profound. And I watched this being, and I tried to relate it to the image of supreme enlightenment. The idea that I had of supreme enlightenment, which was somebody who was absolutely one with totality. And the thing I loved about Ram Dass was that he was one with what is. He was still Ram Dass. He was not other. He was not transcendent of the world. He was so in the world. He was so part of the journey. He was so humble. He found a way to be activative in the world and to help people and to do things for people. And he in no way took the position of being a transcendent hermit being radiating love from some Himalayan cave. He was just here now. That's all he was. And he was a person. At one point, I believe, he tried to give up teaching. And his own students wouldn't really let him do that. But he just felt so deeply that, as one does, I think, as you enter deeper into the now, that without a mind measuring and figuring it out and trying to come up with teachings, he was having less certainty about anything. I'm going to project this on him. and he wanted to say less, and yet everything he said spoke from the now, spoke from that space. It was such a pure emanation of humble knowing. I watched a movie with him and Timothy Leary. I talked about it at that time. And Timothy Leary was dying, and he brought Ram Dass back into his life. They had had some sort of, I don't know, falling out, but they weren't together. And he brought him back, and the movie was about their time together, and about the time right at the end. And there was a hug at the end, which I referenced in one of the talks. And it was their last hug. And Ram Dass put his arm around Timothy Leary and loved him. And Timothy Leary went, which always signals to me, okay, let's get this over with. Enough love, I can't have, don't want any more of it. Or it's okay, it's done. I saw the difference between, let's say, a drug life of exploration into the worlds of God knows what we are and could be based on the drama of the LSD experience or psychotropic drugs. And I saw a guy who used that to get somewhere beyond the drug experience that he labeled and that we now call now. And that journey to now is where it all begins. The true transformation of the self is just being here. If you are really in the now, it has its own transformative aspect. This idea that you have to work to get there is really not exactly a descriptive of spiritual practice. What you need to do is just open to remember and allow the now to present itself at any given moment. Rudy would probably call that work. The work for Rudy was called surrender, which used to drive me crazy as a word because there's so many interpretations, including giving up and failure. But surrender is this not trying to drive the train, not trying to be in charge of the show, not trying to lead the gang, just being part of the whole. Finding your way back into this space of being, which Rudy taught me, and I think other people have learned through many other mechanisms, is an oceanic space of simple kindness, love, beauty, truth, being inside every one of us. There is no one who is not an emanation of that extraordinary thing, which I think we could label in many ways, but the label now is very effective. In the now means that you are not living on the outer edges of love and the outer edges of compassion, but you are in the heart of compassion. You are in the heart of love. You are available to the self that is emanating it and to the self that is receiving it, or could receive it. This love, beauty, truth that is at the center of our being, this nowness, wants, if anything, to be allowed to express itself beyond the limited nature of our personal ego identity and identification. This ego-minded self that we are is basically something called mind in control of the self, dictating the maneuvering of our body-mind identity into and through the now. Rudy said the mind is the slayer of the soul. And I always found that really interesting. And if any of you pay attention to your mind, you will see that much of the time it is not your friend. I was lying in bed the other night and just about to fall asleep, and my mind threw some really weird, angry thing at me. For some reason, I forget what the thought was, some worry, fear, I don't remember what it was. And I said, why did you do that? Why did you do that? What is your goal in trying to make me unhappy as I'm going to sleep? Why would you come out of nowhere and send an arrow into my gut or head? Of course, it didn't have an answer, but it was really important for me to see it at work and to recognize that your mind has its own agenda. It may start out in a programmed way, trying to make sure you're going to be able to function in the material world, because the incredible thing about the now and about being and about this remarkable sense of presence that we are is it has a very powerful need to manifest. I try to share this, I've said it so many times. I think it manifests us essentially to discover what it is and who it is. That the unmanifest, which is the truth and the beauty and the love and the now of being, comes into being to witness its truth, to witness what it is. How does it know what it is if it doesn't burst into the physical manifested life? And to guide us through it, it creates this computer-like device called the mind that just says, you know, if you touch something electrical, it'll burn, it'll be hot, it'll hurt you, kill you. If you jump off a cliff, you probably won't survive. You know, and it tells you if you smile at somebody and they smile back at you, you will have connection, and that connection feels good, and it's a way for the singular self to recognize itself smiling. Touch. It tells you if you touch somebody gently, you will express and feel this thing called oneness and wholeness and belongingness, connection. If you hit somebody, that will not happen. It'll be the exact opposite, and you will reverberate with that sense of betrayal and pain and anger, and that something in you will hold on to that as a piece of information, and the brain will turn that into some kind of defensiveness, and then you will be looking for the rest of your life to avoid being hit and put into pain, and the brain and the mind will start to build a character around you based on your fears, based on your lessons, based on your ambitions and hopes, and it's still trying to protect you, but after a while, especially if you're in the spiritual journey of turn the other cheek, love thy neighbor as thyself, you have to unweave all of these mind messages that are still out there and still working on you. And the only way to really unwind all that stuff is to go deep into the now, the power of now. Be here now. In other words, don't be in the mind worrying about somebody throwing a punch at you. Go into the mind, beyond the mind space. The mind doesn't go into the now. The mind in the now gets washed away. So if you bring the mind toward the now and you step inside, the mind gets super quiet and you're just in now. The now can filter out into your day, it can filter out through your body, it can filter out through your mind, and it can give you this sense of belonging to something really remarkable, which is life, presence, aliveness. And it's really wonderful. When you don't remember the now, you live in a very dark, bodily, mindful state of protectivity, protection, fear, productivity, action. You live in the outer manifested universe, which is only a projection of this deep inner space. You cannot live in half the world and feel content. You cannot get from the physical world what you can already get from inside. The closest we come in it is getting love from another person, which is the now from someone else connecting with the now in us. And we go, and we experience this oneness. We watch a really good movie or a really good TV show, and it really sparks something in us that opens us up through the emotions into the now of the moment. What we're all trying to do is find in the manifested world how to honor, reconnect, remember, reabsorb the fact that we are here temporarily, that we are on a journey of incredible dynamic beauty, to be alive, but we're doing it in order to be connected to the now and to recognize that now in each other as often as humanly possible. You walk down the street and someone smiles at you and the now connects. You get in bed with somebody and you hug or you kiss and the now connects. You listen to a song that somebody wrote that right from their heart and it goes right inside you and it connects. We are awakened over and over to the now, the now, the now. So be here now. The power of now is learning, how do I bring myself back to that space without having to rely on other people to get me there? What's my goal? What's my responsibility? And that responsibility is simple. Sit still, quiet your mind, because it is pretty much dysfunctional when it comes to the now. Turn it off if you can, chant if that's what your thing is, but do something to get quiet and still and just be there, and then lo and behold, the now is there. And if you go deep into the now, which is really probably the core of spiritual practice, going deep into the now, the journey is sensorily filled with things we call awe, wonder, joy, beauty, love, truth, and it emerges in greater and greater and greater aspect, to the point that the little I, the little now of the little person that we are trying to absorb that just can't. And it just relaxes. And it just kind of falls away. And then you become what you always have been, which is the now. You are that. I am that. You will then float back into who you are as a body-mind person. But if you really have enough of a practice or memory cycle inside yourself, even when you're back as a person, you will not forget, even for a minute, I am that. I am that sunlight within. And it's a remarkable gift. It's a remarkable gift to know that. Very few people are able to do it. Most people live on the outside, waiting for the thing to remind them of the now, waiting for whatever it may be, pleasure, ice cream cones, a good baseball game, whatever it is, winning, making money, looking beautiful when you look in the mirror. You have these things that reflect kind of a little bit of what that is, but they're so passing. This experience of happiness, which is so limited, and everybody wants to be happy. We live in a country that gives us the right to be happy, but happy is a very fleeting experience, when the reality of happy is from joy, and joy comes from being, and it's endlessly, completely available to you. You are available to joy if you just sit still. Sit still, and you're going to go through these layers of the mind going, oh God, not again, he's going to sit still. Why is he going to sit still? The mind's going to try to figure out things to do and think about, and you're going to have to look at the mind and go, why are you doing this to me? Don't, just go away for a moment. Just get quiet, settle in, and you will be at home in this ocean of presence, now-ness, beauty, love that is tangible. It's not a temporary thing like happiness. It is the source itself. It's inside you, And if you don't go there, I'm going to guess when you die, that's where you'll end up. You'll go there at the very end. Finding your way there is the life's journey. This is the journey that we're all on. The promise of a spiritual life is you find all of this early enough to live it out in your life, to live in this exquisite space of being. The sadness of the last moment of your life discovering this is that there's a potential for saying, why now? Why did I find it out now? Why is it on my deathbed that I am suddenly realizing what has always been there? It's a sad moment. On the other hand, let me just say this. My friend Jerry Zucker, who directed Ghost, said to me about screenwriting, there are two halves to every movie. Everything up to the end and the end. And if the end doesn't work, the whole movie doesn't work. So if you get a first half that's not working right, but you get the end to work, you got something. So the value of living this life, even failing in trying to get to the now, even failing and staying in the now, even in not having a life that completely pays off in the way that you seem to want it to, just the effort, just the thought, just the idea of sitting there, of there being something in you that cares about, I would say cares about you, but it's really cares about you as this, that loves you, that loves life, that loves being, that loves existence. That thing in you, on your last moment, if you are lucky enough to find it then, it will be 50% of your whole journey, ending up in that. So I say that because the practice of finding your self, of sitting, of opening, of reaching for the now is lifelong. And if you don't find it today or tomorrow, don't give up. Because I tell you, when you get to the very last moment of your life, there is nothing left but now. 50%. Good ending. Good movie. For all of you. So keep at it. Tony.
First of all, thank you for the best homage to Ram Dass of several good ones, but that was a beautiful tribute to Ram Dass and who he was, is, and will be, and to his book, Be Here Now, and all the above. So thank you for that. Two questions. First of all, the name of the Tim Leary Ram Dass movie?
Don't remember.
Okay. The other question is, do you think it was or is important for you to have talked back to, I mean, it's one technique, but to talk back to your mind and say, why did you do this? Seems like a good, in the toolbox, it seems like a good tool.
I found it really powerful just saying, why would you bother to do that? I didn't need an answer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was going to sleep, so I didn't particularly want a dialogue with the mind. It was the recognition that it is a sloppy mechanism, and that it just threw this thing at me. And I don't know that it was purposeful. I don't know that it had an antagonistic aspect. It just allowed this thing to float into consciousness, or to program itself to get into consciousness that need not have been there. And I had the wherewithal to say, no, I didn't want to get in an argument. That gives it a lot of energy when you get into an argument. I said, why do you do that? And I just got rid of it. You know, the idea of a mastermind, and I don't claim to be one, but the idea of a mastermind is able to go to the mind and just do that. You cannot touch me, you will not do that. Something is controlling that, that's keeping it at bay so you can stay in perfect stillness. I guess that's a mastermind. I am not a mastermind, and I don't usually have to deal with an erratic mind, but if it comes in, it's very enlightening, because I know if it's coming in at me, it's coming in at a lot of people, and that a lot of people are dealing with mind events regularly that destroy and undercut their joy. And I don't know why the mind does that, other than it's unruly, it's out of control, we have not mastered it, and we haven't found enough of a stillness in ourselves to look at the mind from that perspective and go, don't do that, don't bother me like that. And that's what we have to do, because it really is aggressive. And what I'm learning as I get older is the mind is more erratic and not filled with the rules and the laws that it used to operate under when we were younger. It's starting to make itself known in bigger ways, especially as it starts to decompose, which is what it will do. And it's very erratic, and it's like you have to tame it down. It's like taking care of a sick dog. You know, you got to treat it a little differently than a healthy dog. You got to give it a little more milk, you got to hug it a little more, whatever it is, you've got to do something to take care of this aspect of self that is starting to deteriorate, maybe faster than other parts of you, or at the same time. But this idea of aging, which I probably will be talking about more and more as I go through it, it's not, there aren't a lot of writings or books about it, because it has such a literally dead end. You know, it's not something that anybody particularly wants to go toward. On the other hand, it's the most important thing that we're heading toward ever. And because we haven't trained during the course of a lifetime to face it, we are still, even in the last minutes and hours of our life, looking anywhere but at where it goes, which, as I said at the end of the talk, is now.
Well, another footnote vis-a-vis Ram Dass is Ram Dass was a central figure in the aging and saging movement, as it were.
Well, I mean, I would direct people to that and where everyone can go, because as you begin this process, it's benefited by the eternal youth, if you will, of one's present tense. And if you can find your way to that, it will help you with the wisdom, if you will, of how to move into the next totally new and abstract moment that has never presented itself before, which is real in all of our daily lives, but most of us are so programmed that we go, okay, I do this, and 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 I do this. And you feel that's reality. But reality is the unknown is coming at you continually, and when you get old, they don't have those structures. So when there's no structures, then you've got to have a whole new ball game in terms of how do I deal with the now that's arising. And that's where we're all headed. And the spiritual journey prepares you for that better than anything else in the world, other than learning to play golf, I guess. You know, but that's not my approach.
I'd like to add something to the Ram Dass story. I felt the same way about the Be Here Now. I thought it was kind of silly and childish. And then I thought, well, this guy's now calling himself Baba. You know, and he goes from like a professor from Harvard to becoming Baba like in about a day and a half. And I thought, well, this can't be. You know, he can't be becoming a. And then later he dropped the Baba, which I felt much more respect for the man when he did that. You know.
That's interesting. I didn't know he had done that. I've not been a follower of Ram Dass, but I have enough of an awareness of him that I've ended up in a space of profound respect and truly, truly felt sad upon his death. And I think, you know, it was like the planet lost something that had been really a gift to life itself, and that to me was beautiful. And you know, I don't know, you know, that the world knew what it lost. It often doesn't.
In the Rudy movie, you see him in the corner playing the tablas. Remember?
Yeah, I don't know that there's another friend who used to be a friend of Blanche's who was playing the tablas, who looked a lot like Ram Dass. So I don't think it is Ram Dass.
That was wrong.
Well, I think Ram Dass appears in the film for a moment, but I think it's when he's getting in the car and driving off with Rudy in another car. And I went, how dare you? But you know, Rudy, God bless him, couldn't care less. So it didn't matter. It just didn't matter.
It was just one more test that.
Just another thing to deal with.
Muktananda kept.
Absolutely. And if you don't have a Muktananda testing you, believe me, life will test you. Every one of us. We are. You do not get out of here without being tested on a regular basis, and the only real way to pass the test is to go. So.
So do you think that Ram Dass had a stroke was a test that the universe gave him
I
to?
don't know if it's as programmed as that specifically. Yeah, some people would say yes to that. Maybe even he would have said yes to that, I think. But he handled it so brilliantly. I thought, when he said I was stroked, I went, okay. And then I've watched in the movies that they've made of him. I didn't visit him day by day.
Called Fierce Grace, by the way, by Mickey Lindley. There's
Fierce-
a movie called Fierce
That-
Grace.
yeah,
about this
that may be
biography.
the movie. Yeah, Fierce Grace. But I will tell you, what I watched was a person who responded to what is in the way it arised. He just said okay, and he went on finding a way to live under enormous constriction. And and I don't know if you know, how he used to go into the ocean. They used to carry him to the ocean, bring him into the ocean, and in floating in the ocean, he felt like completely, himself in a way. He could move, his body moved with waves, and he loved that. And I really loved this guy, and I loved who he became through all of this drama, as opposed to somebody sitting in a state of perfection. Because I don't know what to do with that, And for people who look for enlightenment, I say, take care of your parents, take care of your wife and children, take care of your lives, and then be enlightened. Then somehow that journey is really meaningful to me. The idea of sitting in an ashram with everybody bowing down and bringing you flowers and food and bathing you and being enlightened, I don't know what that is exactly, but it's not a model for me. I see it, but I will tell you, I think it's a lot easier to be enlightened if you're not married. That's my guess.
Being married is a test.
It is, yeah, it's a test, but it's also, it's everything. Yeah, it's everything. And it's like Rudy said continually, if you're gonna be, if you're gonna send love into the mandala of your life, it's gotta start at the core. It's very easy to love everything and everyone on the outside, but love what's right in front of you, daily, moment to moment, now. That's the work. That is the work. The work is be here now and let that flower. And there are times it won't. And then when it doesn't, how do you work with that? How do you say, I'm sorry, or I'm here for you, or forgive me, or whatever those things are that bring you back into the stability of the now. Not to endlessly walk away being sort of separated from it by pride and by anger and all the things that keep people out of the now. Let that go by bringing yourself back in and being present. And it takes certain practices, and they have to do with humility. They have to do with a certain ease and honesty of being. And if you can do that, you can have your life. But there's no life that won't come without these challenges. And if you work with them day to day, they create a kind of what Rudy would call muscle, spiritual muscle. And I love that. I love that Rudy was such a practical guy in ways that I never would have been. It's not my nature to be that. I've always been kind of cerebral and creative. Rudy was down to earth, and I needed that, and I married someone like that. And those polarities make you whole. They give you something that is really valuable. And you hopefully will learn to take from that. And I've taken from Rudy and I've taken from Blanche, and we cross-pollinate. And as a group like this, there's so much cross-pollination, and we all get better. We all get more whole, or more now, more present. And it's a great gift to give to one another, and it's hard to find. And I have this image today of, okay, we all have to go to CVS and love 20 people in the store, deeply. That's spiritual work. They're all there looking for help in one form or another. Could you pull that off? Could you find a way to give everyone in CVS or whatever many people the kind of attention, like go home with them and help them with their kid? What is the kind of attention that we are called upon to live in this life? And that's a really big challenge. And most of us don't have to go to CVS. We have people around us who are just as sick as the people in CVS and need our attention. We need to give it.
3 more film footnotes. First of all, I'm thinking of one of the great ghost ripoffs called Ghost Town, which is really all about that with Rick Gervais. Line produced by Ezra Swerdlow, blessed memory, our friend. That's really an unabashed ghost ripoff, but really pulls it off. About basically a dentist who doesn't want to love anyone except for himself, in whatever crippled way he's doing that, and eventually gets the message of going to CVS and loving 20 people, as it were. I mentioned Fierce Grace. There's also either a Netflix or an Amazon movie about Ram Dass. That's
A
also
short film.
Yeah, short film
no,
that
I know.
includes his being bathed. in the
Right, and I saw that. I don't remember what it's called. Yeah, no, I mean, good movies are about people learning the lesson of be here now. That's really what they are. And every great movie starts with somebody in equilibrium, losing that equilibrium, going through a difficult journey and arriving back at a place that looks very much the same, but in a spiral sense, it's higher up, but you arrive at the same place. And that place is also filled with the same beauty and present tense of now, but it's a higher manifestation of now. And you understand that it's still now, but there are certainly qualities to now that involve maybe higher or deeper or whatever you want to call it. But the now is the constant. And learning how to live in the now, which we all are doing, basically, but learning how to do it is the core. And until you start a spiritual practice, you're just living in the manifestation of the now, which is not anywhere near enough because it's changing every second and you can't get a hold of it. The now itself is changeless. You go into that space and you can go, oh, and trust me, that's where we all want to be. It's the best place imaginable. And we're all there. Enough said. Okay, thank you guys. Next time, same station. Love you all. Appreciate you coming.